Hi, everyone. We'll be starting shortly in about 2 minutes. If you can, mute your microphones and we'll begin again, like I said, in 2 minutes. Thank you to everyone that's joining us. We'll begin in 2 minutes. If you can, just mute your mics and we'll begin shortly. For those that have just joined us, we'll begin in 1 moment. Okay, it's now 2 o'clock and we'll pass it over to our presenter, Mr. Hector Bojorquez, the IDRA Director of Operations.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. I'm very pleased to have all of you aboard. We'll probably be letting more people on, but I'd like to just get some things out of the way to let you know. Don't worry about taking pictures or taking too many notes, or a lot of notes of the webinar. We will be sending out an ebook based on everything that's on here, along with more resources that will be included in this, and with some more comments and further resources. But thank you. So you don't have to worry about taking too many pictures or anything like that. Thank you. So let's start. The title of our webinar is Ready, Reopen, and Reconnect. And it is obviously in the context of everything that has happened in the past year and a half. And what we are really concerned about is that as the nation moves forward in having our students come back in, that we take this time to really concentrate and think how we're going to reopen, how we're going to reconnect with kids, and doing it in such a way that we're able to look at our students as the greatest assets that we have, and that we're able to then take that idea of students being our greatest assets, regardless of where they come from, regardless of how much has been what people are calling student loss, which has occurred, but should be treated differently than just a remediation, so that we can take that and move forward in the most dignified way, and also in a way that really helps our students reconnect with us. So all of these strategies you'll see here are some of them are maybe things that you've seen before, but we will show you how we're casting them in a different light, and then we'll also be introducing some that you may not know about. So let's get started. So first of all, a little bit about ourselves. IDRA we're a professional development independent organization. We've been doing this for about 48 years, since 1973. We have a mission to achieve equal educational opportunity for all children through strong public schools that prepare all students to access and succeed in college. But we work in these 4 fields: research, policy, educational practice, and family and community engagement. All for that mission: equitable and excellent education for all students. As I'd like to just take a moment to look at what our national context is right now, which is very probably problematic. Our absence rates, because of everything that has happened, have doubled. We're in a situation where students have been at home doing remote learning or have been doing hybrid work, and there's some have come back. We are all over the place, but some of the data that we have here is coming straight out of our current experience. The absence rates have effectively doubled. So that is actually an average. So in some places they've been more than doubled, especially in those places where students are in economically disadvantaged areas. Those have been struck even harder with absence rates due to a lot of trauma, a lot of issues that have happened, and almost a virtual dropping out has occurred. Teen disengagement is on the rise as never before. We have data about how this is COVID-19 and the remote are the current ways that we've tried to do education has basically disengaged students, especially among teenagers. Student motivation and morale is lower than ever than before the pandemic. And here's what some of the data. Students have self-reported on motivation between now and what was before the pandemic. Right now, 50% feel less 50% more feel less motivated than before the pandemic. And when they self-report on morale, it's 49%, effectively the same average. So one on motivation and morale. This will affect how students re-enter when we come back face to face. We're going to have to be working with the situation. Here, teachers self-report. The teachers have reported, though, that from where they're seeing, 87% of teachers report that students are less motivated than before the pandemic, and 82% report that the morale is lower. So you have over here what the students self-report, and then what the teachers are observing. These are very striking data. That means we have to approach things differently now. So we will be looking at three different things in this webinar. First, purposeful experiences in our classrooms and what that means. Recognizing student strengths and contributions and how that works out. And fostering positive relationships between teachers and students. These, as they stand right there, may sound like just very wide platitudes kind of recommendations, but there are specific things that you can do that address each one of these things. We'll talk about purposeful experiences in their classrooms. We wanted to make sure that you had very specific sort of practices and activities that you could take that you may have already done, but we have recommendations of how to add greater purpose to them, and you'll see what we mean by that. We'll start with something that I'm sure many of you have worked on with this thematic instruction. Thematic instruction has been around for a long time. However, we're going to talk about ways to make it more purposeful. We're going to talk about project-based learning and ways that is even more purposeful than thematic instruction and how it all can tie things together. And then we're going to talk about cross-age tutoring as it's done through a Valued Youth Partnership, which is a project that we've been working on for about 30 years. So we'll start with thematic instruction and what we mean by that and how it can work. Now, thematic instruction for many years has sometimes has gotten kind of a bad rap, so to speak. There's plenty of units out there that you can buy that's for themes of thematic instruction. And some of them tend to be so specific that you have a hard time really implementing them, or so wide that they're essentially meaningless. But at heart, they should bind all concepts together across all subjects, whatever theme that you're using. They should show students how these concepts learned in reading, math, science, and social studies are all relevant to shared experiences. That second piece is very important. So students very often learn concepts in isolation in reading, math, science, and social studies, and bringing them together with thematic instruction really helps. That is also used in project-based learning, but to a much more specific way. So these are the must-haves for activities in thematic instruction that I'd like to look at, that I'd like to let you know about, that we see as very important recommendations. They should have choices. Students should have choices both in either content and activity, or even reading that we'll review right now. They should be relevant and have direct impact. They should also have the activity should reflect students' identity, self-worth, and personal history, and family engagement. This is not usually what you see as something important in thematic instruction. Usually what you have in thematic instruction is you have one wide theme, such as like say cooking. And you just have activities that have to do with cooking, and that you, for example, you figure out how much, you use math to figure out the measuring cups, fractions, and fractions. That way people write recipes to do literacy. They'll read books that are age appropriate, that have to do with cooking and our food. And that's how the usual thematic instruction happens. Here, what we're saying, one, in order for these to really have purpose and meaning in our students' lives, and to really bank on that, the students must have some sort of self-agency here, and they should have choices within that. And I'm going to show you a kind of lesson that does that. The bit about relevant and direct impact, cooking, something that's just about cooking may have some relevancy to them. Obviously, everybody cooks and loves to cook, but how can you make it relevant to their daily lives? The bit about identity, self-worth, or personal history is incredibly important, along with family engagement. And this is why these recommendations are different than just your typical, what we would consider your typical thematic instruction. We bring these things together because you're centering what students are bringing into these lessons. And right now, at this point in history, in this point in educational history, we have to do this more than ever before. We have to have students feel like there's meaning into what they're doing, and that there's purpose. Now, the purpose here in thematic instruction can be very wide, but it can be also things that they're interested in, and that they understand the concepts across all of these subject areas. That in itself is just a very basic notion of purposeful instruction. It's very basic, but it's something that really we should start thinking about more and more. And I cannot stress this part about identity, self-worth, and family engagement. I cannot stress that enough. And I'll show you what I mean in just a simple thematic example. And this is really for literacy, for elementary school, but of course can be modified for high school. A simple thing would be a weather week, just something about a weather theme. A literacy can be addressed where we find you find multiple short fiction and nonfiction books concerning the weather. Now, the reason I say find multiple short fiction and nonfiction books is for the following reason. Students can then choose their own book for the week, allowing them to have greater agency into what they're learning, and to have greater meaning to them, rather than just one book that's being given to everybody. Now here, students can report on the books each day in their journals using brief prompts. This it doesn't have to be long things, just brief prompts that you can bring into this. This is pretty standard stuff, except for having students choose their own books for the week. The reason that also students having to choose their own books for the week can be very important for you is because it'll also allow for differentiated instruction. If you have found multiple fiction or nonfiction books, you can find them across all the reading levels in your classroom. Now, this next part, students can create a grade level appropriate products that summarize the nightly weather report. But this next part, families can create a journal about memories they have about their favorite seasons. This part right here is to basically start bringing the family together into these, into your lessons, into these thematic lessons. And this is just to get you started on the way we're thinking about this. Now, how we do this with math and science. Well, students can obviously create charts concerning daily temperature, precipitation, and humidity, fairly simple things that they can do. But here's where we start bringing students' own identity and their own history. On the web, you can there are plenty, and we'll send this out with the ebook, links to where you can find what the weather was like on the day you were born. So they can write a brief narrative about exactly how hot or wetter or colder it was the day they were born, as opposed to the current days. So that particular thing is just to start tying their own identities to this. Now in social studies, you could connect the math birth date activity to geography. For immigrant students, have them create a timeline of their family's birthdays and have them illustrate the weather. Then have students interview members of their family about their birth country's weather. I want to add this as a general rule right now. We need to be very sensitive about certain situations. Refugee situations is one because we are experiencing a large refugee influx at the moment. But also in general, that we have to be sensitive about any sort of trauma that happened throughout this year. So we want to make sure that you, as you're approaching these sorts of things, that you're careful not to just say, how did it go? Could you tell us how it went when you had the here in San Antonio, in Texas, we had a terrible weather, we were calling snowmageddon in February. We can say that jokingly, but there was actual deaths across the state. So when we approach this, and when we approach things about even COVID-19, we have to be very, very sensitive about that. So as you're approaching this, just be wary of that, be careful of that. But I wanted to show you how this simple thematic lessons, you can bring in students' identity, students' voice, and student choice, and their own background in order to see that they're reflected in the lessons you bring at the most basic level, and in a very simple way that's not that you can do without much more work. It's something very simple that you can take back to your classrooms. Now, as we look at meaningful and purposeful instruction, actually, I want to check in. Make sure if you have any questions or thoughts, make sure you put them in the chat so we can address them. Now, the second thing we were talking about as far as meaningful and purposeful instruction has to do with project-based learning. Now, the official definition of project-based learning, it's been around for quite some time. And we have been recommending that people use project-based learning as a proven pedagogy during COVID-19. And I think some people have done it to a fairly successful degree. But now that we're coming back in, I think this is going to be a very good tool for us to do this with our students. The official definition from PBL works is project-based learning is a teaching method in which students gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period to investigate and respond to authentic, engaging, and complex questions, a problem, or a challenge. This is why we're recommending this. It assumes, PBL, project-based learning, assumes that students can and will rise to educational challenges when placed in a leadership position. Because when you're doing a project like this, you're giving up a little bit more control. And then the student is the agent of and is the central driver of their own education on here. And the research shows time and time again, when done correctly, it engages student engagement through high interest, rigorous projects. And we have several webinars about this that we can send the links to in the ebook you'll receive. But I want to make sure that you understand that you don't have to turn your entire school into a project-based learning school. There's people think that you really should do that, or you have to turn your entire year into a PBL year. You can start by what is most comfortable to you. The things that we make sure that they're included, or we consider these the 8 basic pieces of project-based learning. First, that there is, and I'm actually don't want to read these to you just all the way across. I'm going to stop for a second, and I'd like to ask, do you have any questions right now about some of this before I continue? Just if you can raise your hand or just let us know in the chat. Okay, so the very first thing why we're recommending this and why we know that this is a tried and true approach has to do with student voice. Student voice in this is very important. As we tried to center thematic instruction around student voice and choice. We wanted to do the same. We wanted to make sure that that you understood that at the heart of PBL is that as well. It is one way that you can center students' experiences, center students' background, students' history, and student identity. And right now, at this point where students are feeling disconnected, that is one very important way in which we can bring them back into the classroom, and bringing them back into the classroom in the most positive way. We run the risk right now with the language that's being used of having students return and having us have them just remediate what we feel they've lost in 1 year. That we've known for years that that kind of remediation makes students constantly feel like they're always behind. And the kind of activities and things that we're talking about, we're asking you to not do that. We're asking you to take a step back and start giving them more agency, giving students more agency so they can have greater choice in what they're doing. And when done in a structured way, and when given a fair amount of time to do this, they will rise to the challenge. PBL also allows for reflection, which is something that is once something is done, when there's questions, both the student reflects on the learning, but so do the teachers on the product, on anything that gets done. There is also the PBL also should have critique and revision, basically feedback from the teachers and students. That's a very important way to have basically almost like a community of learning within your classroom. There has to be a final public product. When you're starting out a PBL, one of the things, and I'm not going to go through the 8 ones, but I do want to point out to these two pieces about there has to be a problem or a question that is meaningful and challenging to students. That again is allowing students to have a greater voice and choice in what's happening. So if they come up with a question about what they want to do and have a project about, it's going to have much more meaning than questions or things that you are coming up with. That really is at the heart of a PBL. That there is sustained inquiry throughout is incredibly important, and you can do this for over. You can take it. Obviously, PBL is not something that you do in a day. It's something that you do over several weeks, or a month, and so that allows you to have sustained inquiry and learning within PBL. So we talked about thematic units, we talked about project-based learning, and now we're going to talk about cross-age tutoring, and specifically how it's done with our Valued Youth Partnership. We have a project called Valued Youth Partnership that is a cross-age tutoring program, and it has it shares a lot of the same features of everything we just spoke about. It is student-centered. It places students in positions of leadership, but there are twists in how it does this. First, we're in this particular project. What we do is take students who are in at-risk situations and have them become tutors for young elementary school children. This is counterintuitive to what many people think. Why would you put students in at-risk situations in this kind of leadership role? Shouldn't you, give them build up their own education, and then they can tutor others? What we have seen over 30 years of having this program, that the students rise to the occasion and rise to the challenge. They become leaders, and they do, their own attendance rates go up. They have lower discipline rates and stronger academic skills and higher self-esteem. Everything that we've talked about right now, from the thematic instruction down to project-based learning, and now to this, all shares the same thing, that the student is at the center of this, that our students have the agency to be the greatest advocates for their own education, and once given a leadership role, whether it be in expressing their identity in thematic learning, or taking the leadership role in PBL, or in something like this in a cross-age tutoring program, they will rise to the challenge. I think if anything, we have to keep that lesson and use it as we welcome our students back into our classroom, rather than have very sequential, very sort of remediation because of what they've missed. And I'm not saying that there has not been learning gaps that have occurred. I'm saying that our approach to those learning gaps have to be different. They cannot be the same thing that we've tried over years with students who are in at-risk situations. Right now, the nation, rightly so, is worried that everybody is at risk, that all of the students are coming in at risk. And therefore, we have to address whatever those learning losses are. And we're suddenly going to start seeing a lot of projects and programs with some of the federal money that's coming in to address that kind of remediation. We have to be very smart about this. We have to make sure that what we do does not increase that gap. Students know that when they themselves know that they're being treated as being left behind, as they're being treated as a student that needs to catch up. So I wanted to bring up, we're going to bring up this cross-age tutoring program again, because it affects their self-esteem and it affects their sense of agency in their own education, and has basically ripple effects across this. This began as a dropout prevention program, and we've found that 98% of students stay in school as they're doing this program. So this has 30 years worth of research and practice. This is one of our principles that's talks about this Valued Youth Partnership. You can see the excitement in students' faces when their 2T spells a word right and gets a math problem right. To them, it's like they've suddenly realized that they've helped someone else achieve success. And what is very important about this is that you see a high school principal here who is suddenly themselves seeing all students as capable of rising to the leadership challenge. There's 5 instructional strategies, which because of time, I'll just won't go through each piece. But very briefly, it is a cross-age tutoring. They have classes for tutors. It includes educational field trips, mentors and role models where they bring in people to the classroom, and student recognition. It is a whole package program that can be brought to your school. So the second thing that we wanted to talk about is about recognizing student strengths and contributions. This is very important, and I wanted to have you to understand what we mean by this. We must, and I don't like reading like this, but I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. We must provide all students with highly engaging educational experience, regardless of achievement levels or learning losses. We've learned over 48 years of our existence that when you treat all students as students that can achieve greater student achievement, and you give them those supports, they will rise to that level. When you treat students who have had some sort of undereducation or have some learning gaps as needing to remediate before they get to higher educational engaging experiences, it does their self-esteem falls, and they just don't do it. They know that they feel like they'll never catch up. There is a list of socio-emotional issues that come up at this with this, and so we must now prepare ourselves to provide a whole new set of highly educational experiences that bears that in mind. We must assume that they're capable of leadership and academic success. And I've repeated this several times, and I say this as a nation. We cannot embark on suddenly trying to remediate everything. If we just try to remediate those learning losses, we're going to spend 2 to 5 years thinking that we need to catch everybody up before we get them to what they need to do. Think of a student who missed out on certain math and algebra skills in this last year. If they come back in and they're suddenly told, we have to go through a highly sequential, remediation process for you to start catching up back into what was next. Think of what that does to their, not just to their self-esteem, but to their sense of self-agency in all of this. yes, there are things that we need to work on, but we don't need to work on them as just some sort of remediation. We need to do it in a sort of way that students are highly engaged and that they themselves believe they can succeed. I'm not saying we lower expectations or we lower standards. What we do is we create those experiences in a different way, rather than just a remediation. We have one question that I'd like to answer, actually. What is our level of concern for how this year's challenges will ripple in years to come? There's two things that we are very highly concerned about. One, that yes, there are these, what we consider, what the nation keeps on speaking of as learning losses, will actually become equity gaps. So if there was already an equity issue within a community due to undereducation, underfunding in that school, or lower expectations that already existed prior to COVID-19, that what was already those equity gaps are just going to become larger equity gaps, and it's going to take 5 years. It's going to take people 5 years to basically catch up. And I'm saying 5 years because that's usually how long it takes in education to try a program, see how well it worked, and then try to kind of start over again. And that's why we're making these sorts of recommendations, that we not start out with the same way that we've done things in the past. So that has us basically have to take our mindset into a different place, into accelerating instruction rather than just becoming remediation. And we have proof points that this works. That's what is very important, that we're going to get to in a second. We have proof points that this sort of thing, that this sort of idea works. That we can get students who are all below average, slightly below average, and get them to succeed at very high levels. There are time and time again, we have proof points, and I'm gonna get to them in a second. So, so you can have an idea of how you can implement this both in your classroom, or if you're a leader in your, where you're teaching, where you're at like a superintendent or principal, you can try to do this. Let me go into that. Thank you, Ms. Gash. This is one of our proof points that I really wanted to discuss. There is a school district in South Texas called Pharr-San PSJA, or Pharr-San Juan Alamo ISD. They transformed themselves from a very low achievement and low expectation sort of district to planning for all students to graduate from high school and college. They act, and we have a publication about this, and we'll send it out with the ebook. It's also on our website, where we analyze basically how they did this. Oops, excuse me. And what they did is basically they decided that first they set an expectation that all students that are from PSJA will graduate either college ready with at least 9 to 12 hours of college credit. This has usually been reserved for the top 25% or the top 10% kids. That's not what happened in PSJA ISD. What happened in PSJA ISD, they made this as an expectation for everybody. And when the superintendent there started this about in 2007, the very first thing they did is they didn't go try to get the top 25% to become, to increase their college going rates. They went first to the people the students that had dropped out. They went block to block and brought those students back. And they said, look, we know you didn't graduate from high school, but we're asking you to come back, not to get your to finish your credit hours or to get your GED, but we're going to get you to start going, basically to do basically start getting credit for going to college. We're going to make you college ready. We're going to have you take classes. So they became basically a college ready, college preparatory, but also dual credit school district. They started there, and with those dropouts, within a year, the dropout rate was cut by half. Now, at this point, they have over 400 students that graduate yearly with an associate's degree, and about 70 to 80% of the students graduate with at least 12 to 16 college hour credits. So we have to do that. We have to do this for them. And it's very important. And I cannot stress this, that when we come back into the classroom, that we don't feel ourselves overwhelmed, because we know that there's something, that there's been a problem the past year that's been traumatic for everybody. So we know that this is a proof point. And the thing is that this didn't only happen in PSJA, in Pharr-San ISD. It also happens in another district called Roscoe ISD. It's a smaller district, it's a smaller rural district, and they basically essentially do the same thing. There, everybody is expected, regardless of where you're at, regardless of where you're on academic achievement, everybody is expected to I'm sorry, not everybody, they have 90% is expected to graduate with an associate's degree. So they have that already built into their mindset. So, but it's not just an empty promise or an empty expectation. They provide the supports in order to make this happen. So again, this sort of thinking makes you think of different ways of having your students achieve, rather than having them believe that they just need to get through a sequence of skills, or that they get into a sequence of classes in order to get things done. It is a way to value the way their own voice and their own ideas as how they can move forward. And again, it hits all the things we're talking about, to be very purposeful in what they're doing, and that they have a real sense of meaning. This can, telling a dropout student, that a student who's dropped out, that they can go to college, provides a greatest sense of meaning that they've ever had before, especially since they've been told that they're always at risk, or they have in their head, they have the proof that they've dropped out and weren't able to do it. So I'd like to just point that out as as a kind of a culminating thing that you can do is in a system level. You can a lot of the things we're talking about are either at a classroom level or at a program level, like the Valued Youth Program, but is this also something you can attempt at a systemic level? When we talk about the Valued Youth Partnership, it shares the same. It shares a very similar. It shares a very similar idea to what's happening in PSJA, because it takes those students who weren't thought of as the students who could conceivably achieve, and makes them leaders. It shares that exact same idea. It shares the exact same paradigm. Basically, you're taking all those students who were not considered to be leaders and puts them in leadership positions. Where what happens at PSJA not only puts them in leadership positions, it tells them you can go to college and you can succeed. And here's one of the quotes, and I'll give you a second to read this quote. We've had this project for 30 years all over the United States, in the Southwest. We've had it in Brazil and Puerto Rico, and at one time in England. It has helped thousands of students and has affected thousands of families over 30 years. And we'll send information about how you can start this program. And we're also going to have another webinar concerning how you can do this program at your campus. This following thing is incredibly important, about positive relationships between teachers and students. I'd like to point out something about positive relationships between teachers and students. In the past couple of years, there's been several books that have been put out about how students who are either in at-risk situations or experiencing trauma or experiencing poverty, how if they have one person who they're able to connect with and who knows about them in their educational career, who knows about what they're doing day to day, who knows about them and who they are, that those students will succeed. There's several books that have come out that show research about this, that show exactly that there's that one person that's involved in there with a student, that students will succeed, because a lot of these students come in and they go to school and they see that all teachers not necessarily believe in their own strengths, on what they bring to school, that they have that one person who does it, who believes in that, they will succeed. We've known this for 30 years or so, or more, for more than 30 years through implementation of the Valued Youth Program, which we'll show you about, because in that program, there's always a teacher coordinator who's running the program, who understands all the students there and who understands what they're going through, and also bears witness to what happens when you treat students differently, when you value them and value their assets. So, but first, to give you some very specific things you can do concerning building positive relationships, very practical things you can do. You can start by creating a professional learning communities, a PLC, concerning asset-based practices. If there is anything that you get out of this, is the idea that about asset-based practices. Asset-based practices basically look at all of our students, and regardless of where they come from, with their educational background, socioeconomic level, and sees that they have the incredible potential of being of having a great life, of being academically successful. And that in what we believe in, what PSJ believes, and what the Valued Youth Program believes, is that they can all go to college. They can all achieve those things. Those, to get our teachers to understand that in a certain way and put it into practice, can take some time. And so what we recommend is to create some learning professional communities concerning those practices. And we have a list of books to help you along with that, where you can have a meeting every month about this. Where there's Paul Gorski's book about working with students who are experiencing poverty. That's a very good book about this. So we'll have those and a list of others, and how to run a professional learning community concerning these assets. Then once you have this sense of having those professional learning communities, have teachers become active mentors to our students. We've done this through with one school district in South and West Texas, where teachers mentor their students this way, and they had monthly meetings as teachers in the PLCs concerning mentoring practices, concerning asset-based practices, and actually talking about the things that were happening to the students they were mentoring. After 1 year, 80% of the students in there started to succeed in their student achievement by standardized scores than they had before. There was an incredible reduction in student absences. They reported feeling also that they were part of a school where they had felt like they weren't part of the school before. And it was all because one teacher, one person at the school believed them and was mentoring them. And it's a very powerful thing. And right now, as our students are coming back, and we're going to be understanding how much disconnection there is, how many of these issues are going to be surfacing time and time again if they're not addressed. Teacher mentoring in this way will really help. Now I'm going to go back to talk about the Valued Youth Partnership, and how the Valued Youth Partnership actually brings all of these practices together in one place.
The focus is on.
Before I start this is one of our principals that's worked on the Valued Youth Partnership. I want to say before I click on this, the Valued Youth Partnership really represents asset-based practice in a very programmatic sort of way that affects all the people that are involved. Because suddenly, where students who were not seen as leaders before are given the opportunity, it has that ripple effect that they suddenly start to achieve. They do better in school. They do their discipline rates go down. All of those things that we usually see as indicators of a student who's at risk, all of those things fall. And we have research to do this that shows this. And when we run this program in schools, we do a yearly evaluation to show you how well it's worked. Everything that we've talked about, and I'm going to repeat that, from the thematic instruction, from the project-based learning, to what's going on at PSJA, to what's going on to what the Valued Youth Program works, centers our students as leaders. It centers our students and their voice. They all believe that students can achieve. And through all of those things, it's not a magical formula just because we believe it happens. No, it's because we set up experiences, we set up lessons in different ways, we set up support systems in different ways that reflect all of that then they succeed. It's not just because we believe it, it's because we do things differently. Just like we say we have recommendations, different recommendations for the way thematic instruction happens is different. We have different recommendations for the way PBL occurs. And we showed you kind of this huge systemic way of looking at kids through the way PSJA did. They all share those things in common. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this real quick.
The focus is on those kiddos that typically fall through the cracks or go to the wayside. So in a program like this, I would make that correlation in that it's almost like second chance. So when we talk about value, the program places value where the students never experience that value. The program places importance on things that the students had never placed importance on because they were never exposed to those things. They were never provided those things. And so those kiddos, those students were typically the student, again, that either sat on the corner, put their head down, wasn't really engaged in the academic process or even the life process, if you will. And going back to that young child they're working with and them finding success and realizing that someone else's success can also be my success. And because those are things that they may not have ever experienced. Those are things that, they sat in the class, they may or may not have passed. They potentially could have been failing everything. And when those types of things happen, unfortunately, the realization of it is they get forgotten, right? And so they sit to the side and they just kind of muddle through the entire academic process, never ever really feeling, yes, I passed some classes, yes, I graduated, but there was never really an excitement behind it. It's just I did it because I had to do it. Where in this sense, where they're working with these young children and they experience that success through someone else, that creates a different type of feeling. Not the I just accomplished it, but the more it's like I was successful at this. We first get them in and it's like, just make sure you're in class. We deal with attendance, we deal with grades, we deal with your other classes, and trying to get them to understand the importance of it. But it's when they actually get to work with the children, all of these things start coming back in. And it starts coming back to, it's kind of like that thing as adults. I'm not going to do what my parents did, but I don't realize how important that was until I am a parent. Kind of do the same thing with these students. They don't realize the importance of the things they're learning at the beginning that lead up to the opportunity they're going to have working with the children. Because once they're done, the kids will tell you the experience they had was just amazing. The excitement you see in their faces when, I got them to spell the word right, or I got them to get the math problem right. And that's a different type of success. That's a different feeling of success because not only was I successful, but someone else was successful because of what I did.
Yes. We're going to send out an ebook that has all of this information, but I wanted to go back and just review this real quick. What ties all of these things together, what Mr. Hernandez just mentioned, a principal that has been running this program. What the program did was put these kids as tutors of these young children, and we're given a very precious sort of responsibility. That idea should travel through, should basically happen in everything that we're doing with our students. It should, that we can trust them to achieve, that we can trust them to be at the center of their own learning, to be agents of their own learning. And it's going to be a very, I know it's going to be a trying, difficult year as we bring them back all in full and everything goes, hopefully everything goes according to what we're planning and to what the nation is planning. But we cannot let those difficulties sort of put us in a mindset that it is the students are the learning loss, that we equate students with the issues that they're coming into they're coming in, that we cannot equate them with the trauma. We have to be sensitive to the trauma that they're coming in with, but we cannot equate them with that. We cannot say they've just experienced all of this trauma, and so we can't have these, put them in these sort of positions. There's a difference between, say, stressing a child out with certain expectations that they can't be met, and having them be leaders in their classroom and their education. That's a difference, and we have to be very careful about how that happens. And I'm trying to making sure that everybody that I speak to, that we let students know, yes, we value everything that's coming in, everything that you're bringing into our classroom, and that we think to ourselves, our students are also not their trauma, they're not the loss, they're not the learning loss, they're not all of these things that they've come in. We cannot treat them with a poor me sort of situation, but we have to be sensitive to what's been going on, because there has obviously been a lot of trauma, in many cases deaths, in many cases also losses, things that have been kind of unimaginable for many of us. But we can bring them with greater purpose and connect them back into our classroom with greater purpose by giving them these sorts of expectations, by giving them these sorts of experiences that we just talked about in the Valued Youth Program. The Valued Youth Program is one way that is very simple to bring into your school and do. I realize that what we talked about with PSJA takes a very systemic sort of thing that needs to be implemented, that usually happens over time. And we can't do that right now. We have to start with some very specific things. Sort of the things we talked about with the most basic sort of instruction that we were talked about with thematic instruction, and even obviously with PBL. But something like the Valued Youth Program can really help you start bringing those students and reconnecting those students. I'd like to take us a couple of minutes here before I continue, because I know I can talk and talk and talk, and I'd like to ask you very briefly what questions or thoughts or observations you have about everything that we just talked about. And I'll give you a minute. And thank you, Ms. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ms. Gash. She says, I like what you're saying, but I feel that as a classroom teacher, buy-in needs to come up from much higher up. That's part of why we're doing this. We're sending this out to principals, and we're going to repeat this actually, because we realize that towards the end of the school year, it's been difficult to have people come in. If you would like to refer your principal, your leadership to us, please do so. We're going to send out at the state level. That's very good, not just principals, but at the state level. That's very interesting. Yes, it's very true. And that is something that I think we all need to be working with on a policy, as far as policy is concerned. And it's very interesting, because we're seeing different states speak differently. Some states are looking at the funding that is coming in, not as learning loss, but to accelerate instruction. And they're using those words, accelerate instructions. Not all states, but some, but we've seen probably about 3 states that are. Which leads me to this question about how can a school pay for this kind of program with funds? Well, and that kind of ties into a little bit into what Ms. Gash was saying, that I wanted to briefly say. Right now, one of the reasons for bringing up all of these things that we just talked about is because schools are about to get quite a bit of funding, federal funding, and they're getting this federal funding as a chunk of it, about 20% has to be used for these still what's considered learning loss, but for students instruction. This can help you bring in both training, or help you implement both project-based learning that we can help you with that, and something like the Valued Youth Program. Those monies are there, and they're allotted. Now, the way that different states are maybe doing these allotments differently, but the allotments are there. So, and they're at the school, at the district level. And these are through your Title I. You can ask your Title I folks, your federal programs people, to find out what your allocations are, so you can start looking at the leadership there. to how they talk about. There are some states who have waited quite some time before they decided how they were going to use these funds. That's been unfortunate. And as I know, as advocates, we've been trying to address that by sending out, if you sign up for our policy recommendations and our policy newsletter, we address that. So I agree with you. It's something that needs to be done at the state level, because state policy can sometimes dictate how principals and even our classroom teachers feel they can or cannot do. And that's unfortunate. And also it's unfortunate that it's in certain states. Only as late as about a week and a half ago did they decide they were going to take those federal monies. And thank you, Ms. Gash. You see if there's anybody else has come up on that. When you talked about the classroom into a safe, comfortable environment, Mr. Galaxy Tab, what you talked about will turn the classroom into a safe, comfortable environment, and will make students feel better. I hope so. That is exactly what is one of the major things that we're talking about here, that when we center our students in this way, that they will feel more comfortable about everything that's happened, that we are basically creating a classroom that values them, not only because there's ways obviously that we all love our students, and we all show many of us can't wait till we come back and see an entire class and share our lives with them again. And that is completely on an emotional affective level, and that's fine, and we have to pay close attention to that. But a lot of what we're talking about here are pedagogy. There's asset-based practices of things that we can actually do in order to just to make that an even deeper connection. It'll make them feel like you really believe in who they are, and not just because you're saying it, because you can, not just saying because you're acting like that, because you're changing your instruction, or as a principal, you're changing how you believe all students can succeed. So it's highly, highly important that we take basically what we believe and what we feel in our emotionally and put it into action and pedagogy. And we're getting close to the end of our session here, and I wanted to go ahead and briefly let you know we're going to have you're going to get the webinar. You can record, you can view the recording in a few days, and there's going to be an ebook that goes along with this, where we'll have a lot more of certain resources that we talked about, resources concerning thematic instruction, resources concerning the Valued Youth Program, resources concerning PBL. So wanted to play one of our last videos concerning the Valued Youth Partnership. I wanted to play this video so you could get a big sense of what this is. And the reason we're going back to this is a program that we have been doing for quite some time. And it exemplifies all of the things we're talking about centering students, about putting them in a leadership position, in this case, cross-age tutoring. So with your permission, I'll just play this video real quick.
Leader.
Mentor.
Role model.
College bound.
Every child, no matter the background, ethnicity, native language, or zip code, has the capacity to excel in school.
But low expectations and lack of support can be some of the most formidable barriers to success.
When students are labeled at risk, they are viewed and treated differently. But when schools place students in positions of responsibility and give them the support needed to succeed, they not only meet expectations, but often go beyond what was thought possible.
Every time I come into the classroom, the kids are always excited to see me. It makes me feel good. It shows me that I'm doing a good job. I think it's going to make me feel more mature, and I can have more self-control.
Fortunately, IDRA works with schools to embrace an asset-driven philosophy that empowers all students to be successful through a cross-age tutoring program called the Valued Youth Partnership.
The internationally recognized Valued Youth Partnership has kept 35,000 students in school and positively impacted the lives of 750,000 children, families, and educators over the past 35 years.
Join the Valued Youth Partnership, committed to valuing all youth, because when you do, every child can go beyond.
IDRA, Valued Youth Partnership.
Stay on to go beyond.
Thank you for allowing us to play that. I wanted to make sure that we centered the Valued Youth Partnership, all of the other lessons we just talked about, in what's happening right now and how we're going to reconnect and with our students as we reopen. The Valued Youth Partnership is obviously something that we know works and is going to be very powerful as we're trying to reconnect with our students, especially with students who will who may have issues. And as all of our students may bring trauma into the classroom and have that as sitting heavy on them as they're trying to reconnect. I would mention, though, that all of the other things we talked about, I hope were of use to you to kind of look at the whole, all of these ideas and everything they share, of placing everything in all of our students in there, and at the very center of this, and believing that they can succeed. The Valued Youth Program does this in many different ways, but everything else that we talked about and the way we framed it is a way to help you implement these things in your classrooms. We are going to, after this webinar, we'll be sending out an evaluation form, and with that evaluation form, with that you'll get the follow-up, the ebook, so you can distribute it among others. The ebook will have all of the links that we've gathered about all of these things. Now, all these links are everything from data that you may need to help people understand the depth of the problem, for example, data from the Brookings Institute, everything also from Edutopia PBL works that all address these sorts of pedagogy that we spoke about. So I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully we'll hear from you again. Thank you very much.